Well, I think you're all already bored, sitting there listening to all of us. Uh, well, let me thank Nobu Aizawa-san, for inviting me and share some of my thought and reflection, to do reflection. And also, I'm really happy to see Pak Humam and also Mas Danang and Kim and also from the Thailand in general. He left for the restroom. I think he's also bored. So, Yuki, good to see you. And it's actually, I'm quite intrigued, and I wanted to challenge some of the points that you made, but I think that is not, the purpose of this event. So we already asked, to reflect on the peace process and how it worked, why it worked, and then whether the challenges are still ahead of us. I will not actually give you a long presentation because I've written a lot, on these subjects, including, before the Helsinki MOU or peace process. And I just focus on 3 points. The first, with regard to the context, of the Helsinki peace talk, which in my view really provided a very strong foundation, for what to come later after the signing of that MOU on the 15th of August. And the second part that I will mention, a couple of lessons that we need to reflect on and then probably dwell upon in order to do the comparative study that you might be interested in. Then finally, a very brief statement on how to basically look for the directions for the future. Yes, of course, Yuki, no single factor can explain why Helsinki peace process work, and why it's still holding until today. All the factors basically combine together and to produce a certain outcome that we all actually live in at the moment. I completely agree with that. But tsunami, in a way, of course, is not the factor that explains why the peace process started, because Vice President Yusuf Kala already also restarted the process that happened before through the humanitarian pause and then the Koha, if you remember, 2000, 2002, and then actually August, I think immediately after the inaugurations, by Yusuf Kala already started again, restarted the process. Then tsunami came. If we believe that tsunami was the key, factor that led to the peace process, then of course would be puzzled to explain why Sri Lanka, the peace, actually, a resolution to the problem didn't occur until the full-scale military operation that they launched. So they opted for a different solution, quote unquote, to the problem. So you can't actually explain the tsunami. And also those who argue that because tsunami then Aceh had peace, must be quite foolish, to really, or lazy, to try to look at a very complex phenomenon and then refer it to the divine, intervention by God by sending tsunami to Aceh, then peace, happened. But in my view, tsunami provided a very powerful humanitarian context. I remember at that time, you look evil, if you still say that we should not engage in peace talk. So it would be very difficult at that time for anybody to basically go against, any initiative to look for a political settlement, because so many people died. I was there on the second day. I remember I called Pak Humam, from Jakarta, I remember, and then we were talking in the morning of the 24th of December, and then at that time, Pak Humam's house actually next to my cousin's house, then they were having coffee. So I called them, and then they had this estimation, probably only 200, 300 people died because they didn't go out yet, from the house because it flooded, in the area. Then later on, after Pak Jika came back, and then he did a survey through the helicopters, then we realized that it was really, really devastating event that occurred. Then on the second day, I flew to, actually after Pak Jika came back, I went there, and then dead bodies everywhere, babies, mothers, and it's incredible. The smell still stay with me until today. It's a very hard, to get away from those reality. When you were there on the second day, especially in the mosque, Pak Humam, in the middle of all the dead bodies. So I went there with Pak Din Samsudin, and then actually we begin to realize how big the devastation it really created. the powerful humanitarian context for any attempt to look for a peaceful solution. I remember at that time some voices, especially within the military, still said, this is the opportunity to finish off the GAM. And then it was General Bambang Darmono who came out and then said, like, how many thousand more that you want to kill in Aceh? It is time for peace. That was his statement, I think, a few days after the tsunami, when the devastation is really hit, and then a lot of people, not only in Jakarta but of course all over the world. So that's brought the second context change, in the Aceh peace process, the international attention. It I think also created an environment that really enabled the peace talk to move ahead. The third one, of course, the new government in Jakarta, especially Pak Yudhoyono and Pak Yusuf Kala, who at that time really believed that political settlement was a must. You could not rely on the military solution to this kind of problem. So the context changed because of tsunami, but not tsunami that created peace in Aceh. Now the second part. What are the lessons that we can learn either from the process of the peace talk and also from the implementation? I do agree that you can't actually attribute the success to the DDR, but I think it's very important also to note that the agreement here is kesepakatan, yeah. It's not treaty, it's not perjanjian. Pak Bambang Darmono this morning talked about you need the parliament approval. That's if you sign the treaty. So because in bahasa Indonesia is interchangeable. The perjanjian, kesepakatan, so but in English it's very clear. Agreement, fine. Treaty, then we have a problem because you need the parliament's approval. So we're talking about kesepakatan, the agreement. So it's not the treaty. So the MOU, Helsinki, is a very comprehensive, completely different from the humanitarian pause in 2000. It's also different from the KOHA in 2002 because humanitarian pause and KOHA is actually only try to establish short-term ceasefire. So, but the MOU is quite comprehensive, try to address all the aspects, all the elements of a conflict resolution. DDR is one part of it. Then I'll mention later on why I think DDR is quite critical, even though it's only one part of it. But the agreement also mentioned about how you actually arrange the fiscal arrangement, center, and the province relationship, and so on. It also acknowledged the identity, the istimewa, I can't remember the exact word in English, the specialty of Aceh, and also it recognized, I think the demand, for local political parties and so on. So it's comprehensive and creative at the same time. I had a differences with Pak Bambang Darmono because he mentioned that, one of the problems actually, GAM never declared itself, disbanded. But I think that was the part of the creativity of the agreement, because it faded away, because declaring it, as the no more in existence, I think will create also a degree of problem internally that might lead to the splinters group, to mount the challenge later on. But I think, whoever were in the negotiation process were very creative, to not address that a very difficult issue. And in fact, we heard a lot of stories and how Pak JK agreed to, like, Aceh want to have their own song, go ahead, because all the provinces actually have their own song, and not anthem, songs, And then you want to have special symbols, flag, go ahead, because all the provinces also have, their own. But until today, there was no special song, right, for Aceh. So they cannot agree which song that they want to use. So that's a very typical Aceh. So don't worry, So, with all those, little things. So it's not limited ceasefire, but it's a very comprehensive conflict resolution attempt. The DDRs is important to establish trust that everybody talked about this morning, because that's what all the parties to the conflict and also the international organization paid attention to. Can we trust, these two, parties in the conflict, the GAM and the Indonesia government, especially presented by TNI, that they were committed to the peace, agreement. DDR is actually a test, whether they, the general, told us this sequence, right? The decommissions of the arms, and then you also, the military would demobilize. The demobilization is not only for the GAM to, disband themselves, but basically for the military to demobilize, and then, basically went back, to. So there is this tit for tat. That's created a degree of trust that, they can believe in the process. They can also, I think, be sure that, once one party follow through with the agreement, and then the other party would follow suit. So that's critical, in my view, the first few months when they, had to do the DDR. And especially the reintegration. Of course, there were a lot of problems. Some people get 10,000, some people probably get less than that, per day. So it created a lot of resentment. But, I think the commitment from the central government of Jakarta is very clear. Through the World Bank program, the KDP, remember the Kecamatan Development programs, because fine, if GAM didn't trust the government, but the government at that time accepted the fact and then asked the World Bank, to actually distribute the reintegration fund, that really created even more trust on the part of the GAM that, the Jakarta this time really meant it, for the implementation of the agreement between the two sides. So that's the second, I think, lesson, that the agreement should be comprehensive, in order to address the conflict resolution, rather than ceasefire only, So that's, I think, helped, in the case of Aceh. Number 3, lessons. So we were lucky at the time because we do have a number of authoritative leader, non-authoritarian leader, the authoritative leader and decisive leaders to ensure compliance from both sides. We have, Pak JK, he was a tough negotiator and a very smart negotiator as well, and Pak Yudhoyono, of course. And then, we had Pak Malik Mahmud and also the late Hasan Tiro. And on top of that, on the practical level, Pak General Bambang Darmono and also General Endi Hartono, who you will listen to tomorrow if you come and also join us here. So that's helped, in a way that, they do have this, I think, a strong personality and authority, to actually ensure compliance from both sides. And the fourth is actually, it is important to also recognize the role of the third party in any mediation of conflict, in any negotiation, and also the process of implementation. So impartiality is critical. Trust is actually came about because both parties at that time really believed that the AMM would be an impartial, a party to the process. So that's actually led to the trust building, especially between the military and the GAM. Then, of course, we should not forget the election in 2006. The election in 2006, actually the first test that was very difficult for the Acehnese and also for Indonesia. And then actually, Indonesia's government, Jakarta, proved that they did not intervene, in the election. And then election it also proved to the GAM that, Jakarta this time really meant to implement, what have been agreed in the Helsinki MOU. I remember Pak Humam was one of the contestants at the time. The fifth one, I think Indonesians learned with the Aceh case that international involvement reinforced Indonesia's territorial integrity and sovereignty, not undermine it. Because, during the humanitarian pause and also the Koha, a lot of this suspicion that by inviting, remember at that time, Gus Dur, the one who invited Henry Dunan Center, to mediate in Aceh. And then a lot of criticism saying that, you invite the third party, especially international actor, then we are going to undermine Indonesia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So international involvement in the case of Aceh also suggests that every one of you partners actually have a very good will to help Indonesia reinforce its territorial integrity and also maintain national sovereignty. So we should not be overly, suspicious of foreigners. Look at Nobusan, it's so nice. How can you suspect him that want to destroy Indonesia? It's just a joke. 6, this is critical. I think during the conflict, the public space was actually dominated by military and the GAM. But after tsunami, and then when the peace talk started, that space was suddenly flooded by the civil society. Even though, it was brief, but, it's actually, at that time, civil society became the center. I remember Pak Humam in February 2005. He initiated the Aceh Recovery Forum. People forget about that now. At that time, the idea of BRR was not there yet. The government wanted to set up something different, Badan Otonomi Khusus, under Bappenas, to actually initiate the reconstructions. Pak Humam took the initiative, and then we all met almost 300 members of civil society from all over Indonesia. Actually tried and helped to formulate the idea by saying that, look, if you don't have an independent agency under the president, then it would be very difficult, to expect trust from the international community. That's why the BRI, came about after, the civil society came together and then came up with the idea. It was, Pak Humam can tell you the story later on, because I vividly remembered what happened, in that meeting in Medan. We didn't have the facilities in Aceh after the tsunami, so we had Medan. So, I went around Medan with Pak Humam looking for good coffee, Chinese coffee at that time. So that was critical, where civil society voices were heard. We had, I think, a couple of hours dialogue with Ibu Sri Mulyani. She was the head of the Bappenas at the time. That's why I think, the 7 lessons that I would like, the 7 lesson that I would like to share with you is the importance of the institutional setup and the presence on the ground. This is really critical. The institutions that is tasked to implement the peace agreement and also in the reconstruction in Aceh matters. So this is what's absent in many, I think, peace attempt before, even in the case of Aceh. The KOHA is not clear, the institutional setup to implement it. And humanitarian pause is even worse. They didn't have, the Joint Security Committee or Security Arrangement Committee, and so on. So institutional setup and presence on the ground is very critical. That's why Myanmar problem now has not been resolved, because there's no, presence on the ground, no institutional setup, so you don't know who's actually doing, this peace process in the country. So these are the lessons, a few lessons, of course, many others, but these are a few lessons that I would like to share with you. And finally, for the future, it's a very brief message that I have. So I think we really need to ensure that this peace that we have had for 20 years really delivers and really capable of creating prosperity. So because, this peace opened the space for improvements in democratic governance and also created an opportunity for development. So Aceh needs to continue to work with the international community on one hand, but the international community on the other hand should also not forget Aceh. So because this is an unfinished work, so we should not let a failure that happened in Myanmar. Remember, in Myanmar by 2010, everybody thought that wow, Myanmar has become democracy, and then the new government came in. Then you had election later on. Aung San Suu Kyi became the state chancellor. Everything's fine. The international community forget about it, and then look where we are at the moment. Thank you so much.